Dynasty Show on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, brought to you by Edge Boost. Edge Boost enables you to double your bet with no interest. Go to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/edge and get started today. We're going to talk about the AFC North. We're going to talk about all of the moves, recap everything that's happened as far as the offseason, and we're going to talk about their draft and what the outlook is for this year. And of course, this is a dynasty show, so make sure that we're talking about the dynasty values. A little housekeeping: make sure you like, subscribe, comment, do all those fun things. It helps, show the bosses that you guys like the show, and help support us for free. Let's talk about the Baltimore Ravens and get straight into it. The Baltimore Ravens, They had a pretty interesting offseason already, all the Lamar Jackson stuff. Brad, with the Ravens, Todd Monken comes in. He had a different offense in Tampa than he ran in Georgia. In Tampa, this was a pass-heavy offense. This was the 30 for 30, Jameis Winston. This was also, you had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin going off. You had a quarterback that was relevant for fantasy. You had running backs that were relevant for fantasy. Everything was good for the offense. It was also a terrible defense. Then he goes to the Georgia Bulldogs, and he's rushing for 190 yards a game. So they're expecting this to look a little bit more pass heavy, but this could be more just a pro style offense versus what they were running with, not necessarily that they're going to chuck it 700 times. So what are your thoughts there about the coaching changes with the offensive coordinator Greg Roman out and Todd Monken in?
Oh, I love it for the overall productivity of the offense. And I think you're still going to see that lean on the run, let Lamar use his legs to set up the pass. It's just now they actually have some dynamic pass catchers. If we can see the return of Odell Beckham after being out for a year with that ACL, the drafting of Zay Flowers early in the NFL draft, still having Rashad Bateman coming into his third season. And then they've got some nice depth pieces in Nelson Aguilar for a deep threat, Devin Duvernay with his speed. And we haven't even talked about Mark Andrews, the alpha and major target getter of that offense. So I think what Todd Monken is going to bring to this team is a little more reliance for Lamar Jackson to actually use his arm. He's going to drive that ball down the field, I think, and it could lean or result in really good things for the wide receiving core as well as Mark Andrews and the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, and so let's start out with Lamar Jackson. Looking at him, he got the big contract, all the controversy, all that stuff is over with. He's going to be a Baltimore Raven for a long time. Let's look at this because they said we are not going to take his superpower away, which is his rushing. Mike Clay agrees. 1,000 yards on the ground with 6 touchdowns. Thoughts here, Brad?
Yeah, it makes sense, right? We're going to see Lamar Jackson. I talked about, hey, they're going to lean on that run game to set up the pass, and they're going to, I think you're going to see just what Mike Clay's talking about here, the 1,000 yards rushing, which is a little bit more than what he had, over the course of the past season with his injuries and everything. You see him, projected to play 15 games here on the screen right now, but I think that, to me, the passing yards are something we may see a little jump in, right? We've seen him throw for 4,000 yards before in his MVP season, along with that 1,000 yards rushing. And I think there's a very good chance that this style of offense could lead to that 4,000 yards passing and 1,000 yards rushing with 30-plus combined touchdowns for him between the air and the ground. So I think these are pretty modest, suggestions for what Lamar Jackson is going to do based on what we think Todd Monken is going to be bringing to the field.
And so you've definitely talked a lot about J.K. Dobbins. You got the backfield pretty split here with Dobbins less than 200 carries. Gus Edwards is at 127. And then you look at the receiving game. Dobbins has never really been much of a receiver. I think this might be a career high at 26 receptions if he gets it. He's never really eclipsed more than that, like 30 mark. Thoughts here on Dobbins projections and Gus Edwards?
I just think it's going to be a little bit more separated than what it is. This is a pretty safe projection. If you look back, at last year, you're seeing 8 games for J.K. Dobbins, 9 games for Gus Edwards. You're seeing 92 carries for J.K. Dobbins, 87 carries for Gus Edwards. Pretty close comparison. I think you're definitely going to see J.K. Dobbins closer to that 250 attempt mark. And you're going to see Gus Edwards further, most likely under 100 attempts. If I had to guess, I just think J.K. Dobbins is so dynamic, and he's a year removed now. That cleanup procedure that he had midway through the season, we saw his explosiveness return. We hope that speed comes back now, and I think you're going to see him at tip-top shape and in tip-top health come week 1 of the NFL season. And I think he's going to dominate the bulk of the carries for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, and Gus Edwards, he's a very expensive RB2. And so he had a very similar injury to J.K. Dobbins, very similar injury to Javonte Williams. It was a multi-ligament injury, and he didn't look the same last year. And he just carries such a high cap hit. I believe it's 6.5. And that is extremely high for a running back, especially an RB2. If he doesn't take a pay cut, I would be very, very surprised if they wouldn't move on from him and find someone else. Not pictured here, Keaton Mitchell was added to this roster, but there are several free agent running backs: Darrell Henderson, Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, and Kareem Hunt. All of them could come in and have a more team-friendly deal than Gus Edwards. So, Brad, you want to talk to us about one of the sponsors?
Oh. But of course, we are the sports gambling podcast after all. So I want to ask you a question on whether or not you have signed up for Edge Boost. If you haven't, then you are missing out, because Edge Boost is the world's first bet now and pay later Visa card. So similar to other buy now, pay later programs, Edge Boost enables you to double your bet with 0 interest. That's right, no interest. And pay back the advance over 4 equal weekly installments. So simply deposit funds into your account, and Edge Boost will match the deposit so that you can double up the funds on any legal sports betting site. Edge currently offers up to $2,500 in advances. So that's up to $2,500 that you can add to your bankroll. Right now, my personal Edge Boost double down play of the day is the over for the Miami Heat and Boston Celtics game, over 204.5. I'm smashing that and using my Edge Boost to double it up. So go to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/edge to sign up today. Again, that's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/edge. Must be 21 years or older to use. Only valid in legal gambling states. If you have a problem gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Double up. All right. And if we had to double up, I would take the Miami plus 7.5, even though I think Boston wins. I think it's a close game. So let's recap their draft. So PFF gave them a B. They got Zay Flowers in the first round. I think we knew they were going to add another receiver. Rashad Bateman's coming up on a contract year here soon. Odell Beckham's on a 1-year deal. He's also coming off of his 3rd major injury, his 2nd ACL injury. And they got Trenton Simpson, linebacker, in the 2nd round. They got Tavius Robinson, edge, in the 4th round. They had Kai Blue Kelly, which is a corner. Then they got a tackle in the 6th round, and then they got a guard that won't play this year, Andrew Voorhees, in the 7th round. That was an excellent pick as far as a value pick. 7th rounders barely make the roster. This guy could be a starter for them next year. They lost Ben Powers in free agency, and we'll see what they can do with that offensive line. And as far as free agency, it's been a pretty quiet one, other than the biggest free agent, which was Lamar Jackson, getting him back on board. They added Nelson Aguilar, Trayvon Mullen, and Odell Beckham Jr. So 1st-round pick, receiver. 2 out of 3 free agents were receivers. I think they wanted to get some receiving in this offense. And so you're looking at the receivers. Odell Beckham is projected to be the top guy. And I saw a tweet today that said they have not had a top 12 receiver in Baltimore since the year after Lamar Jackson was born. It's like, it's been forever. And so Odell Beckham Jr., 51 receptions, 667, 4 touchdowns. Not a great fantasy year. And so if you have Odell Beckham Jr. and you have that type of production, I mean, you probably didn't pay much for him, but you can really depend on someone that's putting out something like that.
Yeah, and it's crazy because there's a lot of yards and there are a lot of targets to go around. If you take a look at 4for4, great site. They do basically an article that talks about the air yardage available and the vacated targets for each team. And currently the Ravens have 1,200 vacated air yards and 163 vacated targets. So between Zay Flowers and Odell, they've got 155 of those 163 vacated targets. So pretty much on par. You look at the yardage, you're close to 1,200 yards. I know that's not air yardage necessarily, but there is a lot of meat on the bone here. It's just identifying what receiver, if really any one of them, can separate themselves from the rest of the pack. I do believe that Zay Flowers is going to kind of be the 4th fiddle right now, and not because I think he's the 4th best player, but he is a rookie coming into the NFL on a team that wants to run the ball first, that has Mark Andrews, the best, if not one of the best, if not the best tight end in the game right now, Odell Beckham, who they paid money to, and Rashad Bateman, who already knows the offense and has a rapport with Lamar Jackson. So I do think this projection that Zay Flowers is going to see 70-plus targets may be a little rich for my taste coming into his rookie season on this team. I do think they're going to try to feed Odell a little bit. I think they're going to use Rashad Bateman on the deep ball, and you're going to see some of these other guys, I think, contribute a little more than maybe what you see on here, like Nelson Aguilar, for instance, 19 targets. I think he's probably one of the better deep threats on the team that they've got, out of the leftovers. So I do think there's going to be some meat on the bone, but I think most of that is going to come away from Zay Flowers and get distributed to some of these other players right now.
Yeah, and Zay Flowers right now he's going, the 109, 110 range in your drafts. And this kind of production from a rookie receiver, this would be excellent. This is an excellent season for him. And Bateman is going on year 3, and he's not done anything to prove that he's going to be the guy. And so if they run a lot more 3 receiver sets than they have in the past, this you could see 72 targets for each of those guys isn't a whole lot. Maybe we see, some of the targets from those running backs go somewhere else too, because that's quite a few targets for the running backs there. Patrick Ricard and Justice Hill, those guys getting 29 targets right there. But let's look. There's no one other than those 3 guys: Beckham, Zay Flowers, and Bateman that you'd be interested in.
No, definitely not. I mean, I don't even know that they're really roster worthy. I'm not one to put them in a flex or anything like that. I think the guy, if you have to, reach down on the depth chart a little bit, is I talked about it, Nelson Aguilar. I just think he's got a little bit of a deep threat in his game. We saw him pull some of those big games with the Las Vegas Raiders a couple years ago. And you could see something like that again. I'm not betting on it. I'm not counting on it. But if you're looking for a little bit of a waiver wire target to go after, I think he may be one that you might be able to sell in season after a blow up game, possibly.
So Mark Andrews, I know you said he's obviously Travis Kelce's the best tight end in the game, but as far as your dynasty rankings, Mark Andrews could possibly be your number one, and for some people he is. Mark Andrews with a 70 catch, 830 and 7 TD season would put him as the tight end too. And so your thoughts here, Brad, on the Andrews projections. Then I want to talk a little bit about Isaiah Likely before we go on to the next team.
I get it. I understand why it's low. I feel like it's a little too low for me. When you're talking about a top end tight end, I know he's only been over 1,000 yards one time, but that's what you want to see. You want to see these guys that's going to, has the potential of over 1,000 yards and 9, 10, 11 touchdowns. And with all of these other weapons on the team now, do you start to see some of that volume go away from Mark Andrews? So I'm going to actually play chicken shit a little bit here, Dave, and I'm going to ask you a question. Are you trying to move Mark Andrews in dynasty leagues right now to try to obtain a Kyle Pitts or something like that? Or are you comfortable with Mark Andrews? Because I don't know that I am right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with Mark Andrews. I like the player. I think he is the number one on this offense. I mean, Odell Beckham Jr., like a lot of these guys are projected for only 15 games. And
Yep.
Odell Beckham's projected for 13. And so if Andrews plays a full 17 games, you're going to see a whole lot more production than what you're seeing here. And I just don't believe in Odell Beckham being able to really be a 90% snap guy. I think he's going to be on a snap count. I think Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, they out snap him. But Odell Beckham is going to be out there. He's going to get targets. He's going to play, but he's still coming off of major injury at his age. And so, and I do think they run the ball quite a bit. I think, whether it's J.K. Dobbins, and I do think that they could bring somebody in, whether it is a Leonard Fournette or Ezekiel Elliott or something like that. They always seem to add an extra vet in there, whether Devonta Freeman, Latavius Murray, something like that. But Isaiah Likely is interesting because you can get him for a ham sandwich right now. And if you're in a tight end premium league, he's a guy that, could, in 2 years bounce to another team on a nice contract. But you could see them run him on the field a lot more this season as well. They liked him a lot. But Lamar Jackson has good chemistry with Mark Andrews, and I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I think he is the true number one in this team. And if you're trying to win your league, you got to have a dynamic tight end, and he's one of them.
Yep.
All right. Well, before we go on to the next team, I want to make sure to talk to you guys about the SGPN app. Don't forget about our Lamar Jackson giveaway. All you got to do is go to our wherever you listen to your podcast, which is Apple, Spotify, and leave us a 5-star review. Send that over to SGPN Fantasy on Twitter, and you'll get a free entry to a signed Lamar Jackson jersey. And on the app, we're brought to you by the SGPN app. All the free picks and podcasts in one convenient app, plus exclusive free roll contest links for all major sporting events. Download the SGPN app for free in the App Store or on Google Play Store. So let's talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. And we're gonna do the recap of the Bengals. They've had a pretty nice offseason. Their draft: A, Myles Murphy, DJ Turner, Jordan Battle, edge, cornerback, safety, defense. Charlie Jones. Do you want to talk about him a little bit later as a dynasty stash? Got my first Charlie Jones share this weekend. And Chase Brown, Andre, it's Lasavis. This guy's super quick. Brad Robbins, punter from Michigan, thought it was a prank call. And DJ Ivy, corner. And then the offseason, the big move was Orlando Brown. So they added Orlando Brown, Cody Ford, and they already got La'el Collins on the right side. Jonah Williams does want to get traded, but they're really trying to protect Joe Burrow. They got Terrell Basham as a free agent, Sidney Jones, Nick Scott, and Irv Smith at tight end. So let's talk out Mr. Burrow, QB5 on the year, according to Mike Clay. Brad, thoughts on Burrow's projections?
I think it makes sense. It's pretty much on par with what we saw last season, and not a lot of change for them from the offensive side of the ball. They got all their key players in Joe Mixon, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, the big playmakers. We do have that question mark right around Joe Mixon and a looming potential suspension, and what does that look like? But I think they've got some guys that they really like, and Travion Williams, Chris Evans, and their new rookie, and Chase Brown out of Illinois. And then they add a playmaking, dynamic tight end that we've hoped would break out in his time in Minnesota, and it just never happened. But we saw Hayden Hurst come back to life in Cincinnati last season. So is it something we may see out of Irv Smith here, given the opportunity? So it all makes sense to me that Joe Burrow is a top 5 quarterback, easy from a dynasty perspective in rankings. I think these numbers make sense. His touchdown interception ratio is really good. He takes care of the ball. They're addressing the offensive line to help those sack numbers come down. So you kind of hope that you do see that. They actually have him projected for more sacks than what he had last season. So that makes me wonder just a little bit as to, what am I missing there? Because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me that be the case. But I think overall the projections for Joe Burrow definitely make sense.
Yeah, and usually in your 6-point leagues, Joe Burrow gets a little bit of a bump. But even in your 4-point leagues, they got him down for 5 touchdowns. Not a whole lot of rushing yards, but as Joe Burrow would say, sneaky fast, sneaky athletic, and they give him a little bit extra. But Joe Mixon, at some point, like Twitter loves to gang up on players, and like they love when like one person, they get that group think. At some point, like we got to stop correcting before we overcorrect. And Joe Mixon is becoming an extreme buy. I get it. He's a little bit older, but this guy's got back-to-back RB1 finishes, and people are like, nah, I'm good. Give me Rachaad White. Give me some of these other guys. Like, there's nothing that says Rachaad White's going to be the guy for the next 3 years. And I'm a Rachaad White fan, but let's be honest here. He can be replaced. Dameon Pierce can be replaced. Tyler Algier already replaced. I mean, these things happen. Joe Mixon, Chase Brown is the only one behind him. And Chase Brown, I'm a fan, but some people don't like this guy at all. Yep. But Joe Mixon with RB1 at number 12, I mean, if he plays 16 games this year, he'd be a league winner. And you could have him for an early second right now.
Yeah. It's well worth it. You talked about the price tag on some of these other guys, but the 3 guys behind him, I don't think any of them were drafted before the 6th round. Like, none of those guys have anywhere near the draft capital to even be given the opportunity unless Joe Mixon misses time, whether suspension or whatever. And at that point, like, what's a mid-second? Like, if you can get Joe Mixon for a mid-second, smash it. If I would probably think about moving guys like Dameon Pierce or Rachaad White for him, even though there is a little bit of upside with the age and whatnot. I'm looking at those guys as people that could potentially be replaced in the next season or two. So Joe Mixon is definitely a smash buy to me. I hope to see a little bit of an efficiency increase from him. With the super, super low yards per carry that he's had the last, season or two. And, the Joe Mixon truthers are always saying, oh, it's because of the terrible offensive line play. And while I get it, there's a lot of truth to that. At some point in time, you just got to say, maybe he's just not that efficient of a ball player. So.
Yeah, and I'll say this. Like I said, I'm not saying go out and trade a mid-first round pick for Joe Mixon. But if you can get an early second or a mid-second in your Superflex leagues, then, yeah, I would do that and go win your championship. Joe Mixon right now, I mean, there could be the suspension coming. Could be nothing. I mean, Alvin Kamara is supposed to be suspended, and that may never happen. I mean, we just don't know with some of these things. LaShawn McCoy was never suspended for his gun incident. Let's move on to the receivers, and they have 2 top 12 receivers. Jamar Chase at the 3 spot, T. Higgins at 12, and then Tyler Boyd at 50. So what are your thoughts here about T. Higgins? Let's go to T. Higgins. Do you think he can be a number 1?
Absolutely. I've loved T. Higgins ever since he came out of Clemson. I said this dude is an alpha mentality wide receiver. He has the skill set. He has the size. And he's proven it, even next to Jamar Chase over the course of the last 2 years, as well as his rookie season with the Cincinnati Bengals. I think he is an absolute stud and can coexist with Jamar Chase. He's shown us time and time again. So I definitely think he had just a little bit of a step in production, and he's a top 12. I mean, he's been, top 15 here the last couple seasons. So what's to say that he can't be top 12?
Well, I will say this. I'm last year, he was only a number one.
Top 17.
When Chase was out. And so we need to see, and there's a lot of production going to the tight end, a lot of production going to the running back as far as targets. But Higgins was a guy where he was a top 7-8 dynasty receiver. You were having to pay up to get him. He did not feel like you were getting a top 12 dynasty receiver on your roster.
Oh, I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, this dude had 900-yard rookie season, 1,000-yard sophomore season, 1,000-yard third season, no less than 6 touchdowns. So, I mean, what else do you look for other than a guy who averages 1,000 yards and 6+ touchdowns a year on your dynasty roster? While he might not be a top 3 or ever have the upside of a top 3 on a team next to Jamar Chase, now is the time to buy this guy if he does move on to another team to be the alpha. So to me, you buy him now, not after his contract is up this season and he happens to or could potentially move to another situation.
So what I'm saying is from a week-to-week standpoint, at season totality is like, yeah, he had 1,000 yards. But how did he get there? So he had wide receiver 77, wide receiver 16, wide receiver 31, wide receiver 3. Baltimore, I think he got hurt. He played 16% of snaps. Wide receiver 41, wide receiver 22, 24, 23. Then Chase got hurt. Wide receiver 4, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 28. You got hurt again, I think. Cleveland, 1% of snaps. Wide receiver 19, wide receiver 4. You had the weird Buffalo game. The Buffalo, that incident. And then you had wide receiver 107. So he was a wide receiver 1, 2, 3, 4 times last year. And that's what I'm saying, is you didn't feel like you had a wide receiver 1 because he was a wide receiver 3 on more than he was a wide receiver 1. And so if I were to say T. Higgins is your wide receiver 1 going into the season, it's not a comfortable feeling.
Well, yeah, but how many people are you comfortable with? There's not 12 receivers that you're like, that's my number 1. There's really like 5 or 6 that you're like, that is the guy I'm comfortable with being my number 1. But T. Higgins, to me, if you take out those games that he got hurt in week 1, in week 5, in week 14, and in the weird Buffalo game in week 17, he to me, that's a model consistency. The guy's giving you double-digit points in almost every game outside of those.
Yeah, I mean, he's a solid wide receiver 2.
What's that?
He's a solid wide receiver 2 on a week-to-week basis, on a points per game basis.
I mean, so what do you think? I guess we need to talk about what a wide receiver 1 is, because a guy that can get me double-digit points and in any given week can give me 150 yards and multiple touchdowns, that's pretty damn close to a wide receiver.
Yeah, I want a guy that's going to be a top 12 guy on a points per game basis the majority of the time. I'm talking probably 70% of the time. And yes, there's some older guys that are going to do that, and they might be a little older as far as the dynasty rankings. But you're looking at a guy that was a wide receiver 1 4 times. And that's just not enough. That's not enough for me. And I'm not going to be able to put him in as my wide receiver 1. I'm not saying I don't like T. Higgins, and I know we got to move on. But when you're paying a 3rd round dynasty startup pick, that's a lot. if you're going to put him as your wide receiver 1. And for me, like that's the struggle right now with the T. Higgins. Can he do this? Yeah, he's got the quarterback to do it. Jamar Chase pulls coverage over, and unfortunately, Jamar Chase has missed some time.
He's done these numbers 2 years in a row now.
Yeah,
and now whether or not the ranking comes out at 12 is, I think, subjective. But he's done 1,000 yards and 6 or 7 touchdowns the last 2 years.
Yeah, so. and end of season rankings, that those are. I don't usually base everything on that. I look at a points per game basis, but as far as Higgins, I think he's good. It just has to do with the price. Are you going to pay up? Because a lot of people have him as top 6, top 7 dynasty receiver last year. I think this year he's probably more like wide receiver 10 in the ECR. But it's it is rich for someone that I just don't think can give you wide receiver 1 production. But we need to move on. Charlie Jones, Tyler Boyd. What are your thoughts here about the rest of the receivers?
I mean, Tyler Boyd's a great wide receiver 3 for an NFL team. Should T. Higgins or Jamar Chase go down, I think that obviously he has some flex appeal there. But with his age and contract status, I think really this could potentially be the last year of kind of real relevance for him. So if you have him on your roster, I would be trying to look for ways to package him and try to get some value out of him now before he starts to try to move teams and he's another year older. But I do think he provides some flex appeal from a week to week basis if the matchup dictates that they're going to have to throw the ball some.
I had someone want to move up in the draft, and he was like, "What do I got to give you to get from 205 to 201?" I'm like, "Wait till we get on the clock, and I'll talk to you about it." And we ended up making a deal, but I just moved from 107 to 106 so I could get Jordan Addison, and I let him have 201 for 205. He asked me Calvin Austin plus 205 for 201, and I was like, no. And then he came back and was like, hey, Calvin Austin for this pick. It was like, whatever, 403 or something. And I was like, nah, I'm good. Like, I have no interest in Calvin Johnson. That's Charlie Jones. I think he's a good player. And I think Tyler Boyd is going to be the odd man out. They're already talking about an extension for T. Higgins. They're already working on an extension for Joe Burrow. They got Logan Wilson coming up on a contract. They're going to have to pay people. And they're putting a lot of resources in the offensive line, a lot of draft picks in the defense. They're trying to build the offense with money, and they're trying to use draft picks for the defense right now. And they lost Jesse Bates because of it. Von Bell, their other safety, they lost. And they lost Hayden Hurst. But I think Charlie Jones is going to be the Tyler Boyd replacement in 2 years. And I think he's someone that people need to stash in the 4th rounds or as a UDFA. Actually, I'm looking at it now. It was 410. I took Charlie Jones just before the end of the 4th round. I didn't want to spend any fab on him, so I just picked him up. Irv Smith. I mean, last year Hayden Hurst was he wasn't sexy, but you put him in your lineup every week and he gave you like 9 points, like copy and paste, every single week. And so if Irv Smith gets that kind of a role, I mean, it really has to do with him staying healthy. 44 targets, 44 receptions, almost 400 yards and 4. That would be a very interesting, piece in this offense, but tight end 22. So, I mean, are you interested in Irv Smith at all?
I think if you can get him for pennies on the dollar, yes, because like you said, even though Hayden Hurst finished as, a top 20 tight end, being able to get 9 points, 8 points a game from your tight end position and just not have to worry about the streaming and playing matchups and all of these kinds of things, I think there's some value in that, right? Now, obviously, we've talked before around how much of an advantage an elite tight end can give you on your dynasty squad. But when you're looking for anybody after those top 4 or 5, you really have a bunch of like 15 people that are all the same. So, yeah, while tight end 22 sounds really bad, how much of a points per game difference is tight end 22 to tight end 10? probably less than 1 point a game if I was willing to make that bet right now.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
Yeah, so I'd be fine with this because people are out on Irv Smith altogether. You've got some Irv Smith truthers, and you've got people that are like, I get you can have him. I don't want him anymore. So for me personally, I'd be willing to pay that back end third for somebody like Irv Smith or an early fourth or something like that if people will take it to get him on my roster and just leave him in from a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, and I don't know who came up with the term truther, but I hate it. I mean, literally, you're just like, I'm sticking to my guns, and I'm very hopeful. It's like you are the hopeful or the fans or the you're not telling the truth because this guy's been awful. And I've been, very hopeful for Irv Smith. He's been on a breakout list of mine 2 years in a row, not doing it again. And it's just like every year you think it's going to happen. Hopefully he can stay healthy and put it together. This is a great situation for him, but he was in a great situation in Minnesota as well. I do think that Mixon is the buy here, and we'll see what happens with the rest of it. But let's move on to the Cleveland Browns.
All right,
Brad's Cleveland Browns got an A.
Hopefully, new DeAndre Hopkins owners here in the next week or so.
I put it out there
that said they're out on him.
I put it out there on Twitter. I tagged both Deshaun Watson and Hopkins and said reunion. The next day, Jeremy Fowler reports, and I was like, "Come on, I'm onto something."
Yeah.
So their offseason grade was an A. They got Matthew Adams, Jordan Akins, Joshua Dobbs, Mike Ford, Marquise Goodwin, Tristan Hill, Maurice Hurst, a lot of defensive linemen, and Wes Martin. The big one was Elijah Moore. They traded a high pick for him. I believe it's pick 52. And then they got Okoronkwo, edge. They got Juan Thornhill, safety, and Dalvin Tomlinson, another interior defensive lineman from Minnesota. He's a little older, but he's a great run stuffer. And then as far as the draft, they still, they didn't have a lot of picks because of the Deshaun Watson trade and Elijah Moore trade. But you have Cedric Tillman, Siaki Ika. You got another defensive lineman. They're really trying to plug up the middle of that. And they got
stuffing is what they're targeting in that pick. So
yeah, and then you got DeJuan Jones, which a lot of people thought was a steal. Apparently, this guy told NFL GMs that his dream is to be an NBA player, and so people didn't know how interested he was, and so he fell down draft boards. Brad hasn't heard that story yet. I mean, there are highlights of this guy dunking, but I mean, if you saw and one, remember the fridge or whatever the guy's name was, that's this guy. I mean, he's
huge. Yeah,
he's huge. He's 300 pounds. No, this guy's going to be an NFL. I mean, he's an NBA player. I mean, you've seen the issues Zion Williamson's having. As far as edge, Isaiah McGuire, that was a nice pick. And then they have Thompson Robinson. That is the UCLA quarterback that I like. Kind of a sneaky little play. Cameron Mitchell, and then probably one of the best values, Luke Whippler out of Ohio State. A lot of people had him as the third, if not the fourth center on the board, and they got him at this, in the round 6. So getting the left tackle or the right tackle and the center from Ohio State Buckeyes, those guys don't have to travel too far. So let's look at it. Deshaun Watson, really, it's been 3 years since we've seen him as a fantasy relevant player. But when he was a fantasy relevant player, he was really freaking good. And Mike Clay thinks he's going to be really freaking good this year. QB7, Brad, not 300 points, just 299.
Yeah, close enough. It's close enough. I do think he's still a top 10 dynasty quarterback in the grand scheme of things. He's still fairly young for the quarterback position. He's on a team that's got some weapons, got an offensive line, all of those kind of things. So when I look at this, I'm saying 3,700 yards. Now, this may be the truth. I'm sorry, the fan in me, because you don't like the term truther, I just found out. But 3,700 yards seems a little low for me to be a top 10 quarterback. So I expect to see him back over that 4,000-yard mark. I think he's got the weapons to do that with guys like Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones stretching the field a little bit, David Njoku up the seam. They've got some really nice pieces here to kind of build around, and we'll get to see Deshaun Watson with a full offseason of work with the players on the team, a full camp, all of those things that we didn't get to see last year post trade with the Houston Texans. So I do believe that it is not a crazy thing to think that Deshaun Watson can be a top 10 quarterback in Dynasty. And quite frankly, he's being kind of valued there right now. If I think about what the cost has been in a few Dynasty leagues that I've seen him moved in.
Yeah. And, the Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, that kind of territory is where he is right now. And he's right there as a back end QB, QB1. And he's still just 26 years old, 27 years old. And he's still young. Same age as Patrick Mahomes. And so obviously want to be able to see if he can shake the demons, stuff from the offseason. But this could be a very fun offense. They're talking about passing the ball a lot more, and they have the weapons to do so. Like you said, they've done a nice job retooling. This is a totally different wide receiver room than what it was 2 years ago, minus Donovan Peoples-Jones. No more Jarvis Landry, no more Odell Beckham Jr. They're really trying to, no more Austin Hooper. They're really trying to get younger as well as get more athletic. And yeah, I think he can pop over that 4,000-yard mark, just play 17 games, and he does it. And then you have, almost 500 yards rushing. Watson could be in really good shape here. And then you look at the running backs. The interesting thing is no Kareem Hunt currently. Kareem Hunt, he says it doesn't seem like he's going to come back. It could happen. But is it Jerome Ford's season, Brad?
I mean, he's definitely the number 2. They really like him in Cleveland. You saw a little bit of work out of him. And I think the big thing that outside of the fact that, he didn't touch the ball a lot on the offensive side, but he did return kicks. So that to me says, hey, we like where you're at from an explosion standpoint, from a vision standpoint. And you may get opportunity if we do not bring Kareem Hunt back. And I think if they don't, they're comfortable with where Jerome Ford is. But do I want him right now? Am I going to treat him like what Kareem Hunt was being treated before? No, because of what you have on the screen from Paul. And I am in 100% agreement with the fact that I think Nick Chubb stays over 300 carries like he was last year. And I think you see a little bit of an uptick in the receiving game. Call me crazy again. This is quite possibly the opportunity for Nick Chubb to have one of his best fantasy seasons to date with another year with Deshaun Watson in that offense, no Kareem Hunt to take carries away, and a continued addition and investment into the offensive line with DeJuan Jones and Luke Whippler, like he talked about, along with the return of all the other guys on that line. So I think the running back, they're very happy with the running back room, which is why you've seen them not panic and try to add, whether it be in the draft or through free agency or trying to retain Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, and we saw this when he was on the Texans. He has not. Appreciate you, Paul. Deshaun Watson has not. He has not gone to the running backs as far as targets in his career. And so we're not going to see a whole lot of that, but 40 targets is not that much, especially for someone that plays as many snaps as Nick Chubb, and hopefully he plays 17 games.
He had 37 last year, so that's not far off from what he had with Kareem Hunt there.
Yeah, and Brissett does check it down a lot more than what Deshaun Watson does. And so we'll see as far as the targets for Nick Chubb, and he's not necessarily he's not a bad pass catcher, but that's not necessarily his game. He's one of the best running backs, if not the best running back in the league from a pure rushing standpoint, but he not necessarily someone that's going to be going out and doing a lot of the passing game work. And there is going to be room for someone else. And one of the reasons Nick Chubb has always been able to stay healthy is because there always has been somebody else. And so we'll see if they bring somebody else. I think Darrell Henderson's an interesting name. I think that Kareem Hunt is out there still. And you could see something else if cuts are happening and other moves are being made this offseason. You could see somebody else over here that we're kind of, off the radar right now. Let's move on to the receivers. Amari Cooper. I still can't believe Dallas Cowboys traded what they did for Amari Cooper. He's obviously not done yet. Amari Cooper is one of the best route runners in the league, and he showed last year with Jacoby Brissett one of the best receivers in the game. And so they got him at wide receiver 19. And I know I had Amari Cooper on one of my championship teams last year, and I was loving it because it was my wide receiver 3 or 4 going into the season, and I could play him every single week. Now he gets Deshaun Watson. I know I just don't play him when it's away. It's fine. Just don't play Amari Cooper in away games. But, 8 games of the year, I'm going to be locked and loading, putting him in my lineup.
Yeah, I think he's top 15. I think this is low. Now, I'm not saying there's definitely the potential that he is able to have another top, I think it was number 10, another top 10 PPR season. I just think with the addition of Elijah Moore, and another year with Deshaun Watson, I think you're going to start to see some things shift around a little bit. But I do think there's a very high likelihood that he's a top 15 receiver, and he will definitely be a top 15 receiver for me in any startups that I'm doing this year. The dude can just catch the ball. He can get open in all situations. He's a touchdown magnet as well, which I think is another big plus for him, right? You're seeing over the last 6 years, 7 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, but he missed some games, and then 8 touchdowns, 9 it's just the dude he can just catch them. He knows how to get open. He knows the finesse. And I think with the conversation I had around Deshaun Watson earlier, I think we're a little low on yardage and touchdowns. I think Amari Cooper is going to be the benefactor of more of those touchdowns as well, which is going to bump him up from that 19 for me into the top 15.
Yeah, I'm looking right at Elijah Moore, and you have QB 7, and then you have wide receiver 19, not a wide receiver 1, and then you have wide receivers 71 and 73, and then 117. That just doesn't add up. Like those things don't compute. Someone else is going to pop if Deshaun Watson is going to have even a 3,700-yard season. And so I like Cedric Tillman, but I think Elijah Moore is the play. And I think you can get him for very cheap right now, get him for a late second-round pick, and roll with it. You talk about draft capital. They gave up a early second-round pick for him. That is good draft capital in a good draft class. They could have drafted somebody, and instead they said, I want Elijah Moore on my roster. And he fits perfectly in the slot, which is where it was a real struggle for the Jets because they wanted to put everyone else in the slot except for him, Braxton Berrios. They want to put double tight ends. Elijah Moore is definitely the play. And I like Cedric Tillman. I had a joke in one of my drafts with Brad. I traded up just to get Cedric Tillman ahead of Brad.
Sneaky.
But let's be honest here. I've been on Tillman before he was on the Browns. He's been one of my guys, and he's a good yards after the catch guy. He's not a speedster. He's not a deep down the field threat. I think he's a very good complement to the rest of the pieces they have because he's a big receiver. Elijah Moore is small. Donovan Peoples-Jones is a big receiver, but he's not necessarily a polished route runner, more of a athletic jump ball, deep threat. Tillman is going to be a chain mover for this team, and when they need those tough yardage, he's their guy, and he is a beast once he gets the ball in his hands and is really tough to tackle. Any thoughts on anyone else on this roster?
No, I would say I think there's going to be a delta because there's currently not a delta really between DPJ and Moore. I do think Elijah Moore is going to be second on the team in targets. I just think his ability to get open Deshaun Watson is going to throw to the open guy. He's much better at distributing the ball. He's not going to force it into tight windows when he doesn't need to. And when you have guys like Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore who can create that separation, I think he's going to be more likely to go to them and less likely to go to a guy like Donovan Peoples-Jones, who doesn't create a ton of separation, but can come down with those contested catches balls down the field. So while he's still going to get those, don't get me wrong, I think Deshaun Watson is just going to be more comfortable with Moore and Cooper. And then I think the last thing I wanted to say was around the ranking that Mike Clay has Deshaun Watson at number 7. I do think a lot of that has to do with that 500 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns that they have projected for him as well, which we really didn't talk too much about his rushing, which is definitely a part of his game. If you think back to his time in Houston.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that does make sense. But like I said, and maybe this is a 4-point passing touchdown, but I do think that another receiver, whether it's Peoples-Jones, Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, somebody else is going to emerge. And if not, Amari Cooper is going to have a higher ranking. We'll see. DeAndre Hopkins comes onto this roster, and you could see a lot of projections change. And
it's going to be different. And I think you're going to see, like I said, Amari Cooper is going to take those targets. I think Moore's up there. You talked about Tillman. They've just got the ability to distribute it wherever they want. So
Njoku.
I'm excited.
David Njoku, 51, 567, and 5 for a tight end 11 finish. Not that exciting. What are your thoughts here about David Njoku?
That feels about right. At best, he's going to be the third option. I don't think he's going to be, and you can kind of see, it looks to me like Mike Clay doesn't want to make the real projection of who is the second option, because he's got DPJ, Elijah Moore, and David Njoku all at 70 targets. Come on, man. Make a projection here. Help me out a little bit.
Elijah
it's
Moore,
not going to be that.
Targets.
Somebody's going to separate themselves, and the others are going to suffer from that. So I think this is a good projection from him. It's a little bit under what we saw last year from David Njoku, but we did add Elijah Moore and Cedric Tillman to the fold. So it does make sense that some of that may come down from what we saw last season. So,
and you heard it first. Elijah Moore, 90 targets.
I like it.
Let's go to the Steelers.
All right. There we go.
Spent a little too much time on T. Higgins.
We really did, yeah.
They added LaRaven Clark, Braden Fahoku, Nate Herberg, Cole Holcomb, Brandon Mann, Tanner Muse, Keanu Neal, Patrick Peterson, Landon Roberts, Allen Robinson, Isaac Samala, and Armon Watts. And they added in the draft Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr., Keanu Benton, Darnell Washington, Nick Herbig, Corey Trice, and Spencer Anderson. To go through the positions, Broderick Jones is a tackle, Joey Porter Jr. corner, D lineman, Keanu Benton. Tight end is Darnell Washington. You have Nick Herbig as an edge, Corey Trice corner, and Spencer Anderson guard. As far as the free agency, LaRaven Clark is a tackle, Braden Fioku is a defensive lineman, Nate Herbig is a guard, Cole Holcomb is a linebacker, Brandon Mann is a punter, Tanner Muse, linebacker, Keanu Neal, safety, Patrick Peterson, corner, Landon Roberts, linebacker, Allen Robinson, receiver, Isaac Samala, guard, and Armon Watts is a D lineman. A grade for actually A+ draft, A grade offseason. Kenny Pickett, year 2. Is he's creeping into that? He's QB 20 in 15 games. Brad, you were a big Kenny Pickett fan last year. Where would you put Kenny Pickett in this draft class? You're muted, Burr.
On this draft class, I would probably have him at number. Oh, God, people are going to hate me for this. I'm going to say 3 behind Stroud and Young, and I'm going to get murdered for it, and I get it. But if you've heard us talk, you know I am just not a believer in Anthony Richardson at all. I am avoiding red flags, alarms, whatever you want to say. So I think he'd be either number 3 or number 4 for me.
Yeah, and so Kenny Pickett right now, he had good weapons last year. He had some issues with the offensive line. I think that they've done a great job in the last 2 off seasons addressing that offensive line. It was so bad it could not be fixed in one off season. But Darnell Washington is the best blocking tight end in this draft. He's almost 290 pounds, 280 pounds is his playing weight. He's a swing tackle out there. Then you have Broderick Jones, and then Samala coming over from the Philadelphia Eagles is an all-pro guard. And so really, really attacked this offensive line. Last year they got the center and the other guard. So I like that for Kenny Pickett. And then they added Allen Robinson, and he already had weapons, that they got George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth and Najee Harris in the recent drafts. So Kenny Pickett here, they have him projected for 3,435 yards, 21 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions, 59 rushing attempts, 266 for 3. Thoughts here on Pickett? Is he someone that you feel like you can trust as your QB2 in Superflex?
As much as I like him, I don't know if I can. I am a believer in Kenny Pickett. I think he has the weapons around him, whether you're looking at Najee Harris catching the ball out of the backfield, whether you're looking at the target monster that is Deontay Johnson, whether you're talking about the down the field contested catch phenom that is George Pickens, your 2 big tight ends in Freiermuth and Washington. Like, if you look at the situation, you say quarterback A with these guys, you're like, oh man, quarterback A is going to have a really good season. I'm optimistic. I just don't know if I can get behind projections any more than this. And I don't know that I would be super comfortable with him as my QB2 right now, just because I need to see the offensive coordinator make some play calls that don't suck. Like, I need there to be some more offensive, kind of enthusiasm. Like, give me something to cheer for here, fellas, because you're making it really difficult with some vanilla play calling.
Yeah, and Pickett might be just like fine for QB2, but he does not seem like a guy that's going to be winning you many weeks. And unless you have Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, you're really you're going to have a little bit of a gap if Pickett's your QB2. Najee Harris, we can move on to him. I guess the big question mark is how much is Jaylen Warren going to chip into his workload? And Mike Clay's got a pretty healthy split to the Najee side. He's got 255 attempts for 1,017. He also has 55 targets for 43 receptions, 275 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Has him as the RB15. Save the offense and fire Matt Canada. I think we can all. Thanks for checking in, Aaron. I appreciate you, man. I think we can all agree on that. But I had Eric Moody on the show, and we both wrote down Najee Harris as our comeback player. And, I think there's a lot to talk about with that foot injury he had last year and all the issues they had. They also had Mr. Trubisky and, the changes of the, plus the issues with the offensive line and the play caller. But RB15, I'm not there. I know he's higher on some other guys. He had ETN as RB10. I'll take Najee Harris over ETN. So I think he's a top 10 running back this year, and I think you can get him at a pretty good value. I will say this, he's going to be 26 years old this season. So as far as, you feel like you're getting a young running back because he's in his 3rd year, he's an older running back already, and that sucks for Dynasty. But as far as this year, I think he's going to be great, and you still can get him at a pretty decent value. And if you get him for 2 or 3 more years, that's going to be plenty fine for me. I know there's a lot of 23, 24-year-olds out there that people are excited about because they're envisioning them for 4 or 5 years. Things happen. Not every 23 or 24-year-old is a dynasty asset in 3 years. So, absolutely, man. anytime, just let us know. Speaking for myself, but Brad also.
Absolutely.
Not always a package deal. But Najee Harris. But what about Jaylen Warren? He's someone you could probably get for a 4th round pick. If you have Najee Harris, are you getting some insurance?
Yeah, and I think Jaylen Warren is definitely worthwhile insurance for him. I mean, this projection makes sense to me. He had, just over 70 carries last season as a rookie. So seeing him kind of bump up to 95 and maybe keep Najee Harris a little fresher, that doesn't seem like a bad plan to me. I mean, most teams are going to that kind of dual back type of mentality. Where your guys are getting 250 to 260 carries, and then you got somebody right around that 100 mark, which is what we're seeing here. So I do think he is an absolute must-have for Najee Harris because, I think you can look at him as one of these high-value handcuff kind of guys. So if I have Najee, I'm definitely looking to acquire Jaylen Warren before the season starts.
Yeah, and you do it during the draft when people are, excited for rookies, and you get – you could get you probably get him for a 4th round pick, late 3rd round pick, and then you get Jaylen Warren plus a 3rd next year or a 4th next year or something. I mean, it's not going to cost you a lot, but he's someone that in a moment, any one play away from an amazing opportunity, and you don't want someone else to gain that advantage. You want to have him on your team because Najee Harris. And this Pittsburgh has notoriously had a bell cow back with someone that gets 75, 80% of the snaps. And it's the same decision makers. The only difference is Najee Harris isn't coming the injury with a steel plate in his cleat and a bum foot. And so, he had other injuries, as well. So let's go on to the receivers. Aaron said it in the chat, and I wholeheartedly agree. Deontay Johnson is your positive regression candidate. You cannot have that many air yards, that many targets, that many catches, and 0 touchdowns. It was so sad seeing him get tackled at the 3-yard line last year. So Deontay Johnson, I feel like, is a buy. And Brad, I'm sorry, but I think George Pickens is a sell based on where they have him currently in the ECR.
And I get that, right? Because he could be one of two things. He could be a true alpha wide receiver who can be a target monster, or he could be just these highlight catch guy, right? He can be, I'm going to give you 50 catches a year. I'm going to give you some spectacular catches to put on film, and that's about it, right? I do think we're going to see him develop. So I'm willing to buy right now. And I did in a couple leagues just to diversify a little bit because I do have a lot of Deontay Johnson because I am a huge fan because not only all of the stuff that you talked about with Deontay Johnson, but also if you go and look at Matt Harmon's reception perception, just year after year after year, Deontay Johnson is putting on a freaking clinic and is green everywhere. He's green everywhere from a success perspective. So, like you said, not only is he a prime candidate for positive touchdown regression, he just wins at all levels of the field. And if he could just catch and turn and run upfield instead of trying to make these gigantic plays every time, you might see a little bit more yards after the catch from him. Another reason why Matt Canada should probably find somebody who can coach up a little bit instead of pretend to call plays. So
yeah, the ECR has him at 32 behind Marquise Brown and Jameson Williams, Quentin Johnston, Jahan Dotson, Brandon Ayuk, Terry McLaurin. And, Quentin Johnston is going at 109, 110 in your Superflex rookie drafts. And so you're saying, George Pickens is around that range. And so I do like George Pickens. I just think that he's someone that you're not seeing the consistency as far as the volume and the targets and the separation that you are from from Deontay Johnson. He's got some cool highlights. He likes to bully corners whenever it comes to the run blocking. Those are all fun to see. but I'll take Deontay Johnson over George Pickens.
So I'm curious, and you'll probably blast me over this trade because it does involve George Pickens. Would you rather have George Pickens and 224 firsts or CD Lamb?
Depends on where the firsts are.
Okay.
I mean, I'm probably going to take, because you get 224 firsts and George Pickens. If one of those is early, we're talking. If both of those are late, I'd probably just take CD Lamb. The picks are fun with George Pickens, but I mean, if you're going to sell CD Lamb, that's what it's going to take. I mean, you're going to have to get multiple first, and we just talked about it. You essentially got 3 first if you were the one that traded CD Lamb, because you got 224 first and CD Lamb and George Pickens, which is, or I'll do a dynasty price check, but he's basically, back end super flex rookie, first rounder.
Yep. I'll look real quick to see where they're at.
So I'll go through the rest of them. Allen Robinson, again, we had this last year. I'm done with him for fantasy, but I do think that they move him to the slot where he plays a lot better. He's lost a step, and as an outside receiver, he's not creating the separation he needs to. He was a 1,000-yard receiver, had great production with Mitch Trubisky and Nagy in Chicago as a slot guy, and they moved him outside, and he struggled in that Rams offense. And Robert Woods kind of struggled in that Rams offense as well. We'll see here, but I think Robinson will be a good slot receiver for the Steelers. I don't think he's going to be somebody you could start or depend on for fantasy, and neither does Mike Clay, wide receiver 90.
Yeah, I mean, he's Allen Robinson needs somebody who's going to hyper target him, because he's not one of those wide receivers that creates a ton of separation. So he has to have trust with the quarterback, and the quarterback has to be willing to throw to him when it doesn't look like he's open. And I just don't know that he's going to have the relationship with Kenny Pickett, nor is he the same caliber player that he was in Chicago a couple years ago, because we haven't really seen the best of Allen Robinson, really, if we're frank, over the last couple seasons. So I agree. If he's on your roster, get what you can for him, because he's not really somebody I want to try to play around with. When can I play him as a flex and when not?
Yeah, and I think it's gonna be hard for Kenny Pickett to support more than 2 real fantasy options as far as the receivers, and you have Pat Freiermuth as well. And so Robinson could eat into some of Freiermuth's production. If Robinson plays better, it will be at the detriment of Freiermuth, because I think they're going to operate in similar parts of the field, with Najee Harris and Allen Robinson, and Pat Freiermuth being the closer to the line of scrimmage targets, with Deontay Johnson and George Pickens on the outside. Pat Freiermuth, I mean, he's tight end 8, and so that's right where he is for dynasty rankings as well. You're getting 60 receptions, 647 yards, 4 touchdowns. Pretty safe season here, but it's still, I mean, it's not going to blow you away. 149 points in a 17-game season. That's not a lot of points when you look at it. It's going to have probably some bigger weeks than anything. But what are your thoughts here about Freiermuth's projection here?
It's like I talked about with Njoku, right? You're looking at, or Irv Smith, you're looking at these guys that are in that 7 to 20 range. How much difference is there? Am I willing to pay up for Pat Freiermuth? Probably not, because Pat Freiermuth is not this athletic freak like a Dallas Goedert or a Kyle Pitts that has top 2 or 3 tight end potential in my mind, right? It's an easy comp, but I'm looking at Heath Miller all over again for the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? That type of, constant 50 to 60 catches, 600 yards, a couple touchdowns just every year, right? Hey, I love that production. And if I've got him, I'm probably trying to figure out how to package him to get one of these top-tier tight ends, because I can move Freiermuth for somebody like David Njoku plus and get very similar production from a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, we just talked about Njoku, who had very similar projections. He was tight end 11. So yeah, I'm similar. I think I said it before. I think Freiermuth is a sell because I think you can get good value for him. And you can get someone like a Dalton Kincaid, or you can get Sam Laporta plus for him. I did a Chig Okonkwo price check this weekend. I was pretty surprised at how many people love him. I'm not the biggest fan. I sold him pretty cheap, but apparently you can get a mid-second rounder for him. But he's tight end 15, and it proves Brad's point about Freiermuth because he was like, I think he got 30% of the votes against Freiermuth, and he's still tight end 15. I think he came in at like tight end 11 in my thread, but I just think people are getting too excited. Even though he's the second option on the Titans, but like the second option on the Titans. Like let's not get too crazy here. And so the chat Aaron asked about Darnell Washington. I wasn't necessarily high on Darnell Washington. I talked about it. I got to go to the combine, meet the players, and he was a lot slimmer than what his playing weight is. They said it was 15 to 20 pounds less, and he ran faster, looked good. But then you have the medical with his knees. You have the limited production. And I do think he'll be, a Jelani Woods kind of a guy, or one of these guys that can really, with really bad form, push a sled far. Like his arms are out wide. Like you never see a guy block like this. But like, yeah. Oh, man, I saw like a bunch of people reviewing that and being like, this is just an offensive line coach would have been like, you're running. Like that was terrible.
Get out of here.
But with Washington, I just never believed it. I think he's, when he gets the ball in his hand, he's hard to tackle. And he's a big threat during, in the red zone. But unless he has an Eric Ebron, like 17 touchdown season, he's just not going to do it. And I don't think he's a Jared Cook. I don't think he's as athletic as a Jared Cook. I think he's more of a Mercedes Lewis. He's going to be good for football, but not good for fantasy. And Mike Clay's got him down for 67. Tight end 67 is pretty bad, 28 points.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Well, hey, we've covered the entire AFC North. Brad, projection, Browns over or under 8.5. Actually, 9.5. I did an article. Browns over 9.5 wins.
No, over. I'm smashing the over.
Well, check my article and see what I think. SportsGamblingPodcast.com. All right. Well, appreciate everyone that hung out with us. We're going to be recapping the AFC East next. We've already done the West, included with a Zach Stevens, beat reporter from the Denver Broncos interview and his insights on the Denver Broncos. We've also did the AFC South. We got Brad's favorite player, Anthony Richardson, in that division, and all the other rookie quarterbacks. As always, good luck this season.
Cheers.
Thanks, Aaron.